Hey everybody, do you find that Mondays after a long weekend are worse than normal Mondays? That's sort of the way it was going. Welcome to the Doug Thompson Podcast, Emerging Speakers Edition. And we will push through all technical and Monday themes, whatever going today. So how you doing? Hope you're doing well. With me today, I've got Mr. Chuck Clayton. How you doing, Chuck?
I'm doing great, Doug. Thanks for having me on your program. I really appreciate it.
Sure. It seems like, and when we get started with things that normally on Monday, there's a time transmogrifier or something like that sort of goes on. Maybe it's a math problem you can help me with. I don't know. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my background's engineering. I was a mechanical design development engineer for many years. I've also been a systems engineer, a quality engineer. I've done some business things and so forth and things like that. So it's pretty wide and varied. That's how I got onto the topic we're going to be talking about today. And I've been fortunate to be introduced to hundreds of different types of tools, techniques, and methods to do problems and decision making and so forth.
Yeah, no, we're talking emerging speaker here, and I know we sort of got conducted through the National Speaker Association, the local group and stuff here, and I know you want to get out and sort of share your message and stuff with that. So let's talk a little bit about. So you didn't. This is not your first book that came
No, it's
out.
not.
So.
I've written several other books, and I remember my first book I spent about 2,000 hours on, and if it sold 10 copies, I'd be surprised. But so didn't think about the marketing. But my last few books have been very successful. They've been in poker mathematics.
Mm-hmm.
My background's engineering, as I mentioned, so I was doing a charity event, and so to get people to come to an event, you go to the group and encourage them to come. And that's what I did. And I fell in love with the game of poker. And so I found it to be absolutely fascinating to use both the left and right brain. It's an interactive type game. You get to meet people and so forth. So after I did the charity event, I had something lacking and I still wanted to keep playing. But the mathematics fascinated me. I mean, there's only 52 cards, but how much can you do with that? Well, it turns out there's quite a bit. And so I wrote a book, Mastering Poker Math. And then I wrote a second one, volume 2. And then I did a workbook. And they've sold over 5,000 copies so far. So they're doing pretty well in there.
Explain if you can very quickly, because this sort of interests me, is the poker math. I know, and I've watched some of these magic tricks, and they also sometimes are just self-working because the math works out.
Right.
Tell me, 52 cards. Talk about it. What's the math that comes up here? You're looking at probabilities, or what's?
Yes. I'll try to give you the minute and a half version. You just stop me anytime, please. Okay. There's 1,326 hands in the game of poker. Out of that, there's only 169 unique hands. Out of that, 5.8% are going to be pocket pairs. 23.5% are suited cards, and the rest are random cards and so forth. Out of that, there's about 40% of the cards that are playable when you sit down at a table, usually 9-person. But out of that, 20% of those are speculative hands. So you really only have about 20%. And then sometimes you can't bet those because people get involved and everybody has their own techniques. What's really fascinating is when you start looking at the mathematics of it. If you have an ace in your hand, and when you first start, that looks pretty impressive. But if it's an ace with a very small kicker and you're in what's called very early position, you don't know what's going to happen after the flop. And if an ace hits, you may think you've got a big hand because you've got a pair of aces. But the fact of the matter is there's 69% probability that somebody else at a 9-person table has been dealt an ace as well. And their kicker may be higher than yours. So if you're playing at a very good table, you have no idea most of the time after the flop where you're at. So that's the type of thing. That's just real simple, but it just gets deeper and deeper. So the mathematics is about 40% of the game, I would say. And the rest of it is, the mental game back and forth between people, which is absolutely fascinating.
Wow. Okay. That explains why I lose a lot. Because the math was never my strong suit, which is weird that I got into engineering, especially the computer part of it. But that's why I've been in the sales part of it, so I don't have to necessarily work the math piece of that. I do the other thing, sort of the social part of the staring down on it. I'd be good at that, but the math part now explains a whole lot
Well, that's
from
about
that.
60% of the game. So, you know, and the math is important and we all have to use math. And so I try to break it down as straightforward as possible. Like I say, what I'm talking right now, I've just done it so many times. It's like, no, I'm no magician. I just, after you've said it several times, you get used to it and you understand it. And I do. It just absolutely fascinates me when I watch the cards drop, because you have to watch the cards, you have to watch what you have to watch the people, you have to understand personality types and everything else. And it's just fascinating. It uses both the left and right brain, and that is very enjoyable.
That's pretty cool. So, and if you talk, you should lose. Excuse me, for lack of a better. I'll talk here in a minute. Let's talk about the speaker game. I think it's a math there, and it's a number of people you talk to and the number of opportunities you get at to get up on stage. I mean, it seems to be that there's a math problem there. I don't think it's quite as clear cut as your poker scenario,
Well,
because I'm still trying to figure that out.
well, I've been in and out of doing speeches and stuff. Is like, what do you have unique to bring to the table?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what do you have that's specifically you? What do you have that other people can learn from and grow? And that's after doing this latest book that I have on critical thinking,
Mm-hmm.
I have something that I don't believe is really out there that much. Most of critical thinking is dry as dirt. You know, going out to the beach and putting sand in your mouth may be more exciting than a lot of the books that are out there. You can learn things, but unless you're a nerd, it's just, Jiminy, it's just dry as dirt, you know? So when I wrote my book, and actually it's a redo of a book that I did back in 2007. And that book was called The Rediscovery of Common Sense, A Guide to the Lost Art of Critical Thinking. Now, if that isn't a mouthful, I don't know what is.
That's a lot.
And it sold a couple thousand copies, and then somebody gave it a very bad review on Amazon. I didn't feel like continuing to pursue it, and there was something a little bit missing. And then when I redid the book a year and a half ago, I kept getting contacted by people, you know, they want to promote my book. And I knew that wasn't the right one, but I got fascinated with the topic again. I got back into it and I got so much deeper, and it was exciting to work on, to bring all these tools, techniques, and methods that engineers use, that business people use, and all these other things, that just takes the ones that can help people, you know, make better decisions. They can do more problem solving. They create, invent, discover. I mean, critical thinking covers so much of what we do in everyday life. It's really exciting if you get into it.
Yeah. So you mentioned common sense, and then you mentioned critical thinking. Can you have one without the other?
I say no.
I would agree with that. And
that's why the name for the first book, but I've learned since then, is always keep the name as short as possible and as concise as possible. That's why, you know, poker math is when I taught that, mastering poker math, critical thinking, mastering critical thinking, you know, keep it as simple as possible. And
critical thinking, I mean, it's definitely a topic anymore, because it's, as you said, you know, common sense is not so common. So critical thinking is different. And why do you think it's more important now, or is it more important now than it ever? Because I'm of the mindset that it's always been important. It's just simply the speed of which stuff does and the amount of data that's out there highlights your ability to sort of filter through and come to that critical decision.
That's exactly correct. If I had to put it in as tight as a nutshell I could, it's have an open and curious mind. Now that sounds really simple, really straightforward. However, when you talk to people, you know, people have a really tough time doing that. I mean, you know, the really great mind can go out and take a concept and a second concept, and even though they're diametrically opposed, understand them. Doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but you start understanding and why they are this way. So, you know, I was just having a talk with a friend very recently, and that friend went, you know, I go with facts and data and empirical evidence. And so we got into this discussion. I won't go into detail, very recently. And the individual, I said, the facts are clear, the data, you know, and the evidence is absolutely clear. This has never worked before. But it was like, yeah, but it's never been done right before. And I've heard
Yeah.
that argument. It's like, this is a very intelligent person, but
Yeah.
you're missing the common sense and the wisdom in there to say, are you really hearing yourself? You want facts and data,
Yeah.
but not when it doesn't work in your favor. That doesn't work.
Yeah. It's funny you admit it, but it just hasn't been tried right the first time. Right. We want to keep doing it because it's failed 8 million times before. 8 million one's going to be the key, and you're the smart person that's going to do it. Right. So,
right.
And it's almost like you get this religious belief that comes in that, because data doesn't lie, although you can make up stories about it, which is fairly easy to do either by showing part of the data or, just totally conflating, facts and other things with that, which I think you have to be a media person to be able to do that artfully. But, but in your, if we'd get back in the, when I grew up, I mean, common sense was a lot more common back then, or you didn't have as much data, but you were able to use the data that was there, and also I don't know what to call it, sort of your intuition, for lack of a better word, that, and I think that pulls in some conscious, pull some data stuff together to help you sort of come to these decisions. Now, I just said a bunch of word salad, which is longer than your first book title, which I may have lost some people with that, but hopefully you know where I'm going with that question.
No, I know exactly where you're going, and you're right. And with the data today, you have a lot of ideological people out there that get into it. I have a lot of favorite books from Thomas Sowell. We talked about this recently. And one of my favorite books that just knocked my socks off was Intellectuals in Society. It's which way is it? Okay. It's right there, as a matter of fact. Okay. And it's an incredible book and talks about all these intellectuals, and they're supposed to be absolutely brilliant, but there's a difference between, intellect and wisdom. Okay. And so they come up with all these programs and they come up with solutions when the world is based on trade-offs. And I get into this very heavily in my book. Most of my book, about 80% of it is tools, techniques, and methods and things like this. Everything from brainstorming to visualization to mind maps to thinking through issues to curious and open mind, all that stuff right there. But about 20% is how to apply them to the problems of today. Okay. Are minimum wage laws really helpful, or are they harmful to the people that they're trying to help? Is affirmative action really helpful or harmful? Again, and I don't know how deep, you want to get into this, but I don't shy away from these issues. Is human caused climate change? How bad is it? And when you start taking things apart, and that's engineering where I learned it, but I also learned, and you mentioned this, is communicating it, because of the way my mind works. I have to try to break it down to be as simple as possible, and when you start looking at things, you can have a different way. Now, my book is all about learn how to think, not what to think. So there's a balancing act, because of course I have my prejudice. I mean, we all do. Okay. But I try to keep them down to a minimum. Thomas Sowell does a masterful job when he writes, and he explains it out as clear as possible and lets you come to the conclusion. But if you really, read it carefully, you can understand what he believes. But it's a masterful way, and that's why his books sell just incredibly, and they have thousands and thousands of positive reviews.
Yeah, I think it's the simplicity of which he puts it, and he puts it in context or words that are familiar to most of us that are hard to refute. I mean, there's only one way, typically, if you're honest about it, that you can see the point that he's trying to make. I know I'm greatly simplifying the mind of a very brilliant man.
You're not. That's the beauty. That's the genius of it, to make it as simple as possible, but not simpler, as Einstein one time put.
Right. So, I mean, and he does a great job about that. So how do you, since we're sort of off in this world of we have our own data, or, we don't really want to see it, or we don't want to think critically about it because it hurts our head. What's the question? So if you're in a group of people, you got different things. What's the one question that you would like them to sort of dwell on when you leave? What's the one takeaway from your book that you'd like them to sort of leave with and stew on, knowing that this is going to take a while to simmer?
Well, I've said it, and it's an open and curious and open mind.
Mm-hmm.
A truly curious and open mind. It doesn't. You've got to try to look at why this idea, came out, and why this idea is, how are they different, and why would people be motivated for this? Sometimes it's just ideological. I mean, people will go, I hate to say it, but they'll go to their grave, pushing this ideological, even when it's been proven, many, many, many times that it's wrong. If I, you keep whacking yourself on the side of the head, and it's like it hurts. Well, stop. It's really simple. Go out and look at it and say, why is it happening? And that's one of the questions I'm always asking is why? Okay. And that actually is a tool to be used when you do analysis of things. Okay. Why are people doing it? What are the motivations? What are, what is it all about? A close friend of mine, when I was writing the book, mentioned how about human nature and sociology and stuff. And I realized, oh my gosh, that is so powerful. And then so I put that in the book. Now, I'm not a sociologist and things like this, but pretty much human nature is a lot of it we all understand, right? What is motivation? The primary motivations are, money and power and sex and all these other things. There's a little bit of altruism, but there's not that many people that are that altruistic. Okay. We do things for ourselves and our family and things like this first before we think about other people. That's just normal. That's just human nature. And this delves deep into when you start getting into why are these things done? And for the intellectuals, it becomes, well, I said it's this way. Well, the facts and data don't back up what you're saying, and they want solutions. And Thomas Sowell goes, there's always just trade-offs, I mean, we can't just stop the world for something. We have to go, okay, there's only a certain amount of money. There's a certain amount of time. There's a certain amount of things we can do, and, without hurting other things. And those have to be trade-offs. And he really pushes that point a lot. And I would agree with it 100%.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's the part where we get into this again. It is a religious, or it's whatever the human brain sort of wired to sort of get stuck in the past. If we don't change it, here's our experiences. Here's what we believe in, be it true or not. Whatever you believe in your brain, it will be true to your brain. It will be, that was what comes on. But I think it's in the trade-off perspective, you have to be willing to, we'll take green energy, which is a good thing. I can't argue with renewables and things like that can do what we need it to do. But you look at wind, it's fine, but what are the downsides to that? Nobody ever considers the downsides to that. We drove up through central Texas through a bunch of wind farms and came into one place where it looked like the wind turbine graveyard. That stuff, they doing a little research, they're supposed, some Chinese company is supposed to have a contract to take it off their hands and recycle it, whatever that means. And they didn't, it's just there. So what do? I mean, it generated electricity, which is fine with no gases associated with it, but the mining to get there, there's all the things, or if you look at the cost to generate electricity to charge a car that doesn't have anything. You have to look at all sides of it and then come to agree, what's the best thing that we can do today, realizing that tomorrow technology could change or things could change that would enable a new thing. But you can't be married to the past, with the decision you made today based off what you know.
Right. And you bring up a really good point, because I actually go into human caused climate change. And I learned a lot as I went through it. I mean, we're all basically carbon-based creatures. Almost all life on Earth is, okay? We breathe out carbon dioxide. Plants breathe in carbon dioxide, okay? There's certain things when there's a great book called Unsettled. I think it's Steve Koonin, but it's an excellent book, and it goes into, and he was under the Obama administration, but he goes into all these different things and how in the end it's unsettled on how much this is. Now that's not saying we shouldn't shepherd our planet, because we absolutely should. Yeah. And so what can we do that everybody would agree upon? Number one, we can stop some of the forest being cut down in some of these places and make it monetarily. I mean, when they're giving money away in certain things, maybe in this particular case, to stop them from that, or getting people to go, visitations. There's all sorts of things you can do to motivate, but also cleaning up the oceans, cleaning up the rivers, cleaning up the lakes, things like that. That's a no-brainer. Almost nobody's going to argue against it unless it's a politically beneficial to them and things like this, okay, or ideologically. But those type of cleanups can help tremendously. When they cut down, the forest by massive amounts on some of these places, and I'm an engineer, so that doesn't make me feel good that they got all these efficient machines to just rip down massive amounts of forest. So, how do we stop that? And because that's the lungs of our planet, and destroying that and destroying some of the oceans and things like this, let's take care of some of that stuff before we go carbon zero. I mean, carbon is a massive amount in the universe, one of the elements in the universe. And like you said, it's a cost benefit analysis, from cradle to grave. And you start looking at, okay, these windmills, for example. Let's take the windmills, because you mentioned that, because I actually do talk about that a little bit. And you have all these windmills and you have all these things, but how much space does it take in comparison to, let's say, a nuclear plant? And if it takes as much space as and I think it's like, I forget the exact number, but it's some high percentage of Rhode Island would be enough for a small nuclear plant, because it's energy density, just like oil is much more dense than that. And when you have to only use them for a while, then you're exporting, because they have to still create the whole, wind turbines and things like this, using oil and everything else. So there's all this energy. And then when they destroy it, so what is your net benefit is what you're looking at.
Yeah. And it's a longer term view than a lot of us want to look at it. And nuclear itself, I mean, wind isn't on demand. I've been on sailboats before and with no wind, it's not, you're not sailing very much. And you can't harness the stuff where there's too much wind to sail. So how do you deal with that? So how do you bring this, sort of take around, your book goes into a lot of, I like that it uses real world examples, and that Thomas Sowell was an inspiration for you to sort of help simplify your message and do that again, because I think we can't get enough of him in our lives to help us spur that, because he just boils it down so simple. We think it's a complex thing, and it's not. If you just come on down to, it's like, okay, if I go back to fractions, let's get to the lowest common denominator, right? And then we can sort of solve it from there.
First principles.
And I think he helps do that. Yeah.
Yes.
And I think that's what your book aims to help people do.
It does.
So how does Best get a hold of you? Well, when's I guess is the book out, but how to Best get a hold of you, and where are you most active?
The best way to get a hold of me is just contact me through my email address. Okay. If
and we'll put this in the show notes too. So.
Okay, good. And it's chuck@chuckclayton.net.
Okay.
And as I said, I'm getting out more, and I want to be able to get into some of the places, for the Chamber of Commerce's and the Rotary clubs and some of these other type of places to be able to speak, and then it moves up from there. But the message I want to get out is for people to, you don't even have to believe me or anybody else, but figure out what you want. And if you want to go with the truth and things like this, then how do you get the facts, data, empirical evidence? One of the friends of mine who reviewed my books, that I probably had it too many times, but facts, data, empirical evidence. And empirical evidence is just the evidence that's already out there, what's happened before. And so empirically, it just means, that's what it is. Okay.
Yeah. It's well established. It's
well established.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Chuck, thanks a lot for that. I mean, it's definitely, the first step in that would be realizing that you need to think more deeply, and you need to go check out Chuck's book to sort of take the first step on that journey, I think. And Thomas Sowell, while you're at it, buy a pair. And then,
yes.
then
I appreciate it.
Not that Thomas Sowell needs any more things, but he is brilliant, man.
He's brilliant. He just came out with a book several months ago, and he's 93 years old.
Yeah, and that goes to prove that just because you're older doesn't mean the faculty's not. It's not a universal truth.
Correct.
Right. And there was a 108-year-old woman I saw on the news today who was celebrating her birthday. She drinks wine and likes to flirt with the guys that are around. Yeah. But people that, it's just like you each is an individual, make your own journey, make your own decisions, think critically about things. And thanks for listening to the podcast today.
Thank you, Doug. I really appreciate it. I've had a great time.
Cool.